So I know it's been a while, but I've been really busy. I'm still a little bit busy, but I did see a video from Matt Walsh that I couldn't help but respond to. It is from a fair while ago, but I doubt he's changed his mind, so I'm going to respond to it now. So he posted a video in which he responds to TikTok influencers, and normally when Matt Walsh and Ben Shapiro and Michael Knowles respond to TikTok influencers, they generally pick on people on the extreme end of the spectrum with some pretty far out views. But here it seems like Matt Walsh responds to a point that was similar to the one I made in a previous video, which I'll link in the description. So let's watch.
Gender is a social construct, and as such, the definition of woman, which is a gender, will change depending on where and who you are. The definition for gender overall will be different across countries. Biologically speaking, it doesn't even make sense to try and define woman through biology because not all females are the same. Example number one, some can't have kids. Everyone who says that motherhood is what makes you a woman is literally just invalidating every woman who either can't have kids or doesn't want to have kids. The same applies to sexual organs and genitalia.
Okay.
My God has forsaken me.
So let's start with there isn't a definition for a woman. Well, to begin with, then, stop using the word. You cannot use a word if it doesn't have a definition. If by your own telling it has no definition, then what are you doing using it? So just as a comparison sake, if I were to tell you this. Hey, I was walking down the street the other day and I saw a zipper do. I saw a zipper do when I was walking down the street. Can you believe it? It was this really big zipper do. And then you said, "What's that? What is a zipper do? What are you talking? What is that?" And I said, "Oh, it doesn't have it. It's not anything. It doesn't have a definition." You see the problem here? How can I possibly be talking about a thing that has no meaning and no definition? It becomes incoherent babble.
Please, no gibberish tonight, please. I beg you.
Sorry, Daddy.
So, if that is what you actually believe, then you are not allowed to use the word anymore. You can't talk about women's rights. You can't talk about women's equality. You can't talk about the alleged women gender pay gap. You can't call yourself a woman. What is the definition of a nonsense word? Well, that would be a word that has no meaning.
Okay, so this is me at editing, so this might be a little rough, but I wanted to comment on this point briefly. So it seems like the broad outline of what Matt Walsh is trying to say is that if you can't define a term, then the term has no meaning and you can't meaningfully talk about that term. And if that is the argument that Matt Walsh is trying to make, it's just obviously false. And there are many reasons why I think it's false, but I'll give one. So there are terms called semantic primitives, and very briefly, these are terms that can't be broken down any further, such that the definition of the term you're trying to define is going to contain a word that's basically synonymous with the term you're trying to define. So it can't really be defined in any illuminative kind of way. So some examples of semantic primitives might be kind, part, good, bad, big, small, true, now, before, after, here, above, below, etc., etc. And basically, these are terms that when you try and define them, they're going to contain a term in the definition that's basically synonymous with the term you're trying to define. So I'll give an example. So you might want to know what the term before means, right? And before is a semantic primitive. So when you look up the definition of before, it's going to say, well, before, during the period of time preceding a particular event or time. And then when you look up the word preceding, you find that the definition of preceding is coming before something in order, position, or time. So if you don't already have the concept of before in mind, the definition that's provided by saying, well, it's something that precedes something else, well, precede is basically synonymous with before. So it's not really a helpful definition unless you already have the concept of what it means to precede, which is just what it means to be before something. So that's, one example of why Matt Walsh's claim is obviously false, because we use semantic primitives all the time. I use the word before, after, space, time, all the time, and they clearly have meaning, yet they're not going to be clearly defined in any illuminative sort of way. And so, that's one example. Again, I think there are many other examples of ways false, but that's one example.
And then from there we get the standard, which we've addressed, at length. But the old
well, there's some women who can't get pregnant. You see?
checkmate.
Checkmate.
A woman is a female, that is the sex that is supposed to be able to bear offspring. There can be disease, there can be genetic abnormalities, there can be mutations, there can be injury, there can be sickness, there can be old age, which would all preclude those things, but that is still a capability that this category of person is supposed to be able to have.
If any of you remember the previous video I made about Matt Walsh, I talked about family resemblance concept. I'm not going to go into too much detail here. If you want more detail, you can watch the previous video I made. But roughly speaking, family resemblance concept is a concept that does not have clear boundaries. In more technical language, it does not have any necessary or sufficient conditions. Rather, for something to be considered as a part of a family resemblance concept, it shares a whole host of various traits and characteristics. Philosophers argue that this concept is often used in language when referring to things like chairs, tables, and games, etc. Therefore, if something is part of a family resemblance concept, there's not going to be a clear-cut delineation as to what counts as that concept. Importantly, though, that is not to say that the concept doesn't have any parameters or no traits often found in said concept, or that the concept is meaningless. Just because something can't be defined very clearly or doesn't have necessary or sufficient conditions does not make it unintelligible. I do think that people have in mind a concept when they speak and talk of a concept of game, for instance. This is not the first time that someone has responded to the question in this way either. Digital Gnosis made a similar point, and he puts it much more succinctly than I do.
So a question I keep asking conservatives that none of them can answer is just, for a basic definition, what is a table?
Well, that's easy, dude. A table's anything with 4 legs.
Okay, so a horse is a table.
Well, no, it's gotta have a flat surface on top as well.
So that chair is a table.
No, I mean, it's like something you could potentially use to ride on.
So the floor is a table.
No, I mean, it's the thing you put in front of a chair to ride on.
So if I put my shoe in front of a chair and write on it, it's a table. Some people like to pretend that asking for a definition of something that covers absolutely all cases should require a simple response from anyone who's in their right mind. Now, offering a definition that might help someone who doesn't understand how to use a word is something probably all of us could do, but offering a definition that covers absolutely all cases and possible counterexamples isn't something that most people can do for most ordinary words that they use. Just think of chairs, tables, or games, for example.
So here the idea is that there isn't going to be a definition, or presumably not a short definition, that encompasses all instances of what a chair is. It seems that Matt Walsh and co. ask for a definition of a woman. He's assuming that the definition provided has to include some trait or characteristics that all women have. And this is just to presuppose some form of essentialism that is extremely controversial in philosophy.
This question isn't the gotcha that they think it is. It's like asking, oh, can you define Europe? And then having a knee-jerk reaction being like, hi, you can't define Europe. Don't you know Germany's in Europe? Of course Germany is in Europe, but what about Greenland? What about Russia? What about Turkey? What's difficult is about defining the boundaries, not the ones that are right in the middle. And turns out, TERFs can't properly define the boundaries either.
So this is actually not an attempt to answer the question. There's and most of the attempts to answer the question are attempts, obviously, to evade the question, which is exactly what this is. And by drawing a totally incoherent comparison, not everything is the same. Not everything is comparable.
Tomato, what's the difference?
Woman is a biological category. A continent is not. Even a country is not. We could reduce it down and just talk about a country. These are not biological categories, and so they aren't comparable.
So I think Walsh has completely missed the point here. The point that I think the person in the TikTok was trying to make is that there are some things that may have grey boundaries, and they use the concept or the example of a country. Matt Walsh then says that this is an incoherent comparison because a woman is a biological category. I'm genuinely struggling to find the relevance of this remark. The point is that there are two concepts that are similar in one respect, namely that they have grey edges as to what qualifies as a woman/country. The fact that one is a biological category and the other is a geographical category is completely superfluous to that point. And that is even granting that the concept of woman is entirely biological, which presumably a lot of people, especially more liberal people, will reject or challenge.
You actually can define Europe. I mean, it does have definable boundaries. But even if you can't, or even if you say, well, it changes over time and all this, okay, that actually is a human construct. You see, that's the difference.
Well, that's your opinion, and it's her opinion, but it's not my opinion.
It's something that people come up with, and then we draw the boundaries and we define it. Woman is not a human construct. We did not invent the reality of females.
I don't get how someone can't do the same thing for countries. I mean, presumably there is a real landmass that people call Europe, and presumably it would still be there regardless of whether people called it the North Pole or whether there were any people there to name it at all. We aren't just creating the landmass. We didn't invent the reality of that landmass in much the same way that we did not invent the reality of chromosomes or gametes or the propensity to have higher or lower voices. Presumably, the reality of the land masses and chromosomes would exist regardless of what we call them. So I genuinely don't understand what Matt Walsh is getting at here. And honestly, the more I think about it, the less I understand it.
We came up with names for these things, but we didn't come up with the concept. That's the difference. I don't know how else to explain it.
What you'll frequently see from transphobic people on platforms such as Twitter or even in meetings with politicians is that they start yelling, "Define women." And this has become a kind of mantra for the transphobic movement, the concept that for some reason trans-inclusive people can't define women. But it's rooted in a fundamental misunderstanding of how language works and how we define people. And you see this pretty clearly when you see people like Graham Lynham fail to define a chair in a way that he ends up including a horse in the description of the chair. Or today when someone responded to a transphobe demanding they define women, and they responded with someone who bears or has the capability to bear eggs. And someone simply responded to them with a photo of a man holding a tray of eggs.
Turn this off. Really, that's what we're doing now? Well, you can't say that women have the capability to bear eggs, because what about men who can hold chicken eggs? Really? You think that is a gotcha? You think, really? The word literally means to produce. And so the member of the human species who can produce eggs, that would be the female.
Well, a man can buy eggs at the grocery store.
I think this is both not the best example from the person on TikTok, but I also think Matt Walsh is being a bit uncharitable. So I think what the person is trying to describe is similar to what Digital Gnosis was explaining earlier. It's not the best example because I think there's a bit too much equivocation on the word bear. Maybe a better example could possibly be an example of a machine from the future created with the ability to create and fertilize eggs. I know that there's going to be plenty of responses to this where Walsh and co. are going to explain that it is about the ability to bear eggs naturally or something, and then more counterexamples can be given and we go down the semantic game that we went down with the chair. But the point is not to give some nuclear argument against all strict definitions of woman, but to tease out some counterexamples of rigid definitions so as to force the other person to revise their definition as to what they mean by certain terms.
And then we get this thing about the chair. You hear this a lot from the trans activists. First of all, again, a chair is actually it is literally a human construct. It is something that humans construct. It's something that we make. And so it does not belong in the same category of existence as biological entities.
Again, I have no idea what relevance this has to do with anything that was brought up. The point is that there are terms that don't have clear definitions. I would love to know, actually, if Matt Walsh thinks that there is a clear, simple definition of chair, because it's interesting, he hasn't actually denied that a chair can't be easily defined, much less offered a definition of a chair. So my question for him is, if he does think that a chair can be easily defined, or if he thinks it's a family resemblance concept or some other sort of concept like that, I think the concept is intelligible, even though it can't be easily defined. If this is true, then asking what a chair is not going to have a clear answer, yet the concept is perfectly coherent. This means if someone takes woman and man to be a family resemblance concept or something similar like that, then the question, what is a woman, is also not going to have a clear answer, yet still can be a coherent notion. Whether it's a human construct or not is completely irrelevant. I want to point out here something that I wanted to point out, or I should have pointed out in the last video, that I think is vitally important. I've been talking about gender as if it's a family resemblance concept, and I just want to make clear that that is one way of thinking about gender, but there are many other ways of thinking about the term, such as it could be a primitive notion, it could be a cluster concept, and they can also include transgender people under the umbrella of the term woman. For the sake of continuity and simplicity, however, I have gone with family resemblance, but I just want to make it really clear that that is just one way of thinking about the term, and there are and can be others. Even though I don't think I need to, I will still address this whole human construct objection. So, I see no reason to think that family resemblance concepts are limited to human constructions. One might think that rocks, lakes, and puddles are family resemblance concepts or something similar. Now, they might not be, but the point is that if Matt Walsh is going to rest on this distinction for some reason, I still don't really see what work it's doing for him. To do any work, he needs an argument that the family resemblance concepts can't be used to describe non-human constructs, an argument that he hasn't delivered. However, let's just be charitable, I think hyper charitable, and grant him that family resemblance concepts and similar such concepts only work for social constructs. Again, I'm not convinced this is true, but we'll grant it. Well, if you take gender and man and woman to be terms that are social constructs, then what? Problem solved? If Walsh takes it that family resemblance and other such concepts can't be used for social constructs, can be used for social constructs, and gender is a social construct, then presumably the problem for Walsh is resolved. If this is the case, then someone who takes gender and the terms man and woman as terms that refer to social constructs, then presumably he isn't going to have a problem with the answer to the question, what is a woman, having an answer with vague boundaries that doesn't have reference to necessary and sufficient conditions. I also want to say that I don't really understand what Walsh means when he says we didn't come up with the concept. This is a detail that I don't particularly want to delve into too much here. I might at a later date, but I'll just say for now that there's a few ways of interpreting this, and I'm not really sure what he means. So setting family resemblance aside for a second, there also seems to be some unclear distinctions between some naturally occurring phenomena in the same way that the previous TikToker was talking about when discussing countries. I suspect one will have a very tough time distinguishing at what point a hill becomes a mountain or a puddle becomes a lake. One can also find it very fuzzy as to when someone is considered to have dark eyes as opposed to light eyes. This example is very clear to see the spectrum because we're dealing with color. But this is just another example of naturally occurring phenomenon that don't always have clear boundaries. I think the first TikToker was actually spot on when they said that the difficulty comes in categorizing the ones in the middle, not the ones clearly on one side of the spectrum. There is a debate as to whether sex in the biological sense is a binary or not. I'm not very familiar with the biology, so I don't feel comfortable speaking on that, but I don't think the distinction is as black and white as Matt Walsh may want to paint it. It might be, for all I know, but even if it is, I think that my other points stand or fall independently of that point. There's much more to say on this, but I think I'm going to end it there. Thanks all so much for watching, and I think I said this at the last video, but I'm happy to debate Matt Walsh on any of these topics if he takes issue with something I said. I'm happy to go on something like Modern Day Debate and debate him on it. He'll probably never see this because I'm a small-time YouTube channel. So, it probably won't happen. But if he does see this and he wants to debate, or you want to send it to him, then I'm happy to debate him on it. But once again, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it.